Hi, Andreas from Toddle here, and we just released a brand new feature called style variables. And what they do is they're essentially the same as style variables defined in a Toddle theme, but now you can define them for an individual element inside a component, and you can set their value using a formula. So it kind of allows you to bind dynamic data from a formula to a style variable you can use for your styling in the style panel. And to show you how this works, I'm going to go and create a bar chart component for Toddle that we can use inside this weather widget I'm building. Right. So I'm going to create a new component. We're going to call it a bar chart. And the first thing I want to do here is I want to add some data through an attribute here. Right? So we're going to create a new one called data. And this is an attribute because every time you're using this chart, the data is obviously going to be different. And so we want to pass that data in as an attribute. And I have some example data here I've defined in JSON, and I'm just going to paste that directly in. And the way our data works here is that it's an array of items, and each have a label and a value. So now we're going to go here and add a div to our page. And we want this div essentially to be repeated for every item in the bar chart or in the data, right? But first, let's add a little bit of layout. So I'm going to take this one and say, I'm going to say you're going to be width 32, and we'll just say height at 40 for now. Maybe 32 is a bit much. Maybe we'll do 24. Then we'll give you a background color of some nice sky, 600. Maybe just we'll do a good blue. Blues, that's a good one. And we'll add a border radius of 99, which is basically just say make sure that it's round, right? So we're going to select this, and then we're going to say attributes and repeat. And the data we want to use here is our attribute data, right? Data from attributes. Then in our bar chart here, I think we'll add a little bit of styling. We're going to say you're going to always take up the full width and height that you are allotted, right? Because that way we can just wrap it in another element wherever we use it, and it'll fit that dimension. Then we want it to flow in the row direction, align it to the bottom so they come up, and then you can double click this and it'll basically space them out evenly, right? I think that works pretty well. I'm gonna add now some, we'll add some padding here of 32, 32, I think. That's a bit of padding, maybe even a little bit more. 64. Maybe that's a bit more. Let's start with 32. And then we're going to add our labels here. So I'm going to add a span below. And we are going to first center all our content. So the span's right here. And then this label right here, now we're going to use our repeat item for each bar. We're going to use the repeat items label, right? So it says Monday right here. Let's go and give this some styling. Let's start by moving it to the bottom, and then we'll actually, well, let's first change the color. We're going to use the same blue. Here we are, but like a 100 version, so it's quite light. And then we're just going to go and take the top property and move that down until there's sort of a nice, somewhat nicely down here, right? That works pretty well, I think. You can play around a bit with the padding, etc., to make sure that everything fits nicely, right? But so now we sort of now that we set up the basis of like, okay, we've got the bars, they're repeated. That's all nice, but it's not really much of a bar chart because all these are the same height, right? So what we want to do now is go and change their height based on the value given in their in the data, right? So what we can do here is now select the bar here in the div. Then we're going to go to the top here where we can see we can create a new style variable. And I'm going to create one, and I'm going to call it bar height. And this is a type spacing. There's a few types you can do. Spacing is that basically every time you have to say height, width, or any sort of distance in a toddle, it's going to be a type spacing. And the unit we want to use here is percent. So I'm going to define the size in percentage of the container, right? And the value we want to provide is just our repeat items value. And so if we say okay to that, nothing happened because, well, we defined the variable, but we still have to use it. So I'm going to go down here, and now, just like I would set a variable from a theme, I can do exactly the same with my bar height here. But the difference is that because that's set on this div, and every div has a slightly different variable sort of data value in the data, right? These are all going to be different values matching their input, right? Now there's one more thing I want to do, because this is actually not the greatest solution. It has one problem, which is what if you have data where like this one is 160, right? So now that is actually 160%, so go outside the bar chart. So we kind of need to normalize our data so that it all fits into the chart and everything is resized in the right way. So to do that, I'm going to create a new formula. I'm going to call it max value. And I want to get the maximum value in our data. So if we look at our data, the way I can do that is I can use what's called a reduce formula to reduce this array down into a single value. That's why it's called reduce, right? And the way this works is you give it an accumulator. That's kind of its initial value. And we're going to give that initial value of what's going to be a number 0, right? And then this formula, the second argument here, that's essentially going to be run for every single element. And here we're going to take the result, which initially going to be the 0. And then we're going to say, what is the maximum of that and the item, right? Or the item value, of course, right? And so the first time this runs, it's going to run for the first element and saying, what's the biggest value of 12 and 0? And it's going to say it's 12. Next time, the result here is going to be the value of the output of the first one, so 12. So then it's going to go and check against, in this case, the value will be 17, right? It's going to say, what's the biggest 12 and 17? And it's going to say that's 17. It's going to keep doing that all the way down. In this case, the result that comes out is 160, right? Because that's what we put into our data. So this is how you basically just get what's the maximum value from an array, and especially an array here where it's like complex nested data. You actually, it's the value property for that you're getting at, right? So now that we have the max value, all we need to do is instead of saying, instead of defining this bar height as just its value as a percent, we're going to say what is its value as a percentage of the maximum value, right? So we're going to take the value, we're going to divide it by the max value, and then we're going to multiply by 100 to get it as a percentage value, right? And so now you can see now it's dynamically adjusting itself to actually fit that that space, and the actual bar heights are going to be a percentage of the total height, right? And you see we end up with something that's 7.5%, perfectly fine. I didn't bother rounding off because it actually gets the most accurate anyway, right? So now our bar chart is done. There's a ton more things we could add to this, but we're just showcasing style variables, right? So I'm going to go to my homepage and I'm going to add it in here, my bar chart. And then I'm going to provide it with the data. And my data here is going to be my weather data from this weather API. And then I'm going to get my daily data. And now we're getting a lot of undefined and weird values because we need to make sure this data looks or has the right shape that the component expects. And that is an array of items. It can be as many as you like, but an array of items where each item has a label and a value, right? So here we can use the map formula. And I'm going to go and create an object. I'm going to say label first. And the label value I want here is going to be the day from my weather data. So that's actually the name of the day. So you can say Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, right? And then the value I want to use here is going to be the item temperature. Let's go with the maximum temperature, right? So now we've got a bar chart here that shows the temperatures for the next sort of, about a week, right? Using these style variables as a way of of sort of dynamically sizing each element. Go try out style variables. This is just a little bit of what you can do with it. There's a ton of cool use cases and features, and we will obviously add more videos where we use this in the future. If you haven't tried Toddle yet, you can go and try it for free today at toddle.dev. Please join our Discord server as well, and I can't wait to see what you're going to build.